Welcome to today's bit of fun. We are using Inktense, those amazing pencils, but it's going to be easy, but dramatically effective. We'll use one pencil, but I'll also show you how you might add 2 or 3 pencils to that. We'll use one big brush and we'll create 1 or more amazing sketches using 3 simple techniques, breaking big tasks into simple, fun ideas that you can just get started with today. Enough of that, I hear you say. Let's dive straight into it. The first technique is dry, using the pencils as pencils. It's pretty obvious, but it's also pretty useful. You use these pencils, you get interesting textures, and you can draw lines and outlines, even little details. If you only use dry textures though, you will only go so far. And remember, Inktense, like any watercolour pencil, is beautiful when you apply that water. So if we take 3 different colours here and we apply a little bit of water using our one big brush, they come to life. Now, it's important to note I'm using 3 moody colours just to demonstrate these ideas. You only need one colour to create something pretty cool, and the colour you use will determine the mood. Moody colours, moodiness when you bring them to life. The next technique number 3, splattering. Taking your big brush and just flicking the end of the pencil. Let's have a zoom in and see what that looks like. Super fun, really easy way to control everything. And then I'm going to sneak in a 4th technique because this is really still wet. So this is still technique 2. I'm going to call it wet 2. And look what happens when we pre-wet the page and we draw our lines and we cross into that wet area, we cross out of it. Notice how the quality of our line changes. If we make a long flowing line, when it gets dry, it changes again. This gives us loads of interesting opportunities, loads of ways to experiment and play. That pigment, that wet pigment, can be lifted up and it can be put somewhere else. And if we sharpen our pencil, expose lots of that lovely pigmented lead, we can put more of that pigment on the paper, and suddenly here we can see those wet techniques really come to life. They really produce something vibrant and punchy. And like that, our 3 ideas, splattering, using some wetness to allow the flow of these colours, and our dry techniques come together. Now I hear you, enough theory. I told you you could fly by the end of this. Well, here's how it works in practice. I use my pencils, 1, 2 or 3, and you can do this absolutely with 1. I create my outline, a little bit of texture within. I get my giant brush and I get some water. I apply my water to my page in a well thought out manner in theory, and it provides each of these shapes something extra, a little bit of life, a bit of interest, a bit of tone. And notice how I'm not just willy-nilly applying the water. The colour will flow in the direction of your brush. So if you cover every line, the lines will just bleed out. But if you cover just one side of the line, you'll get a shape filled with colour. And notice you can also pick up the pigment from your brush and paint with it. You can splatter. You can add, if you want to take this a step further with more than one colour, you can add different colours into different areas. You can mix just like you would on the page with watercolour paints as well. And whilst I'm using Inktense here, well, I would use these same techniques with other water-soluble or watercolour pencils. It's all about experimenting, being a little bit abstract, having fun, and seeing what the media can do for you. Yes, I hear you. Enough blah, blah, blah. Let us get on and do a little bit of actual art making. So I have here my single pencil. And I'm going to be cheeky. I'm going to use another one later just to show you what you might do with more than one pencil. But with my single deep blue pencil, all I'm going to do is sketch out my scene. And I want you to take a note that this scene is sort of scary and complicated, but this technique will make scenes feel so much easier, much less complicated, much more approachable. All I'm doing, I've got my one pencil and I'm finding the shapes in my scene. I'm sketching a little bit of the perspective, I'm sketching the big shapes. I'm using a continuous line, and if you follow my channel, you'll see this is something I love doing to simplify all the time. And if you want to ask me more about continuous lines, do drop a comment down below or even send me an email. Always happy to talk about these wobbly, loose lines I love using. As I move around the page, I'm not trying to capture every detail with my continuous line. I'm just trying to focus on what are the key things which jump out to me. If they're the key things which jump out to me when I'm looking at the scene, they'll be the key things which bring the scene together. And you kind of aim to produce something which looks a bit like the scene, but we don't worry too much if it's not absolutely perfect. If some of the proportions or the perspective is a little bit off, well, often that makes things a lot more interesting. And you can see I'm not bothering with drawing all the bricks. I'm not bothering with adding tons of detail. With this technique, you absolutely do not need to do that. This technique is all about getting a simple outline and then letting those wet, flowy textures do all the hard work for you. So I'm starting to look at this and thinking, wow, I must be almost done. It doesn't look finished yet, does it? But we're never going to finish it with those dry textures. Like I said at the very beginning, if you only work in dry textures with water-soluble pencils, you will only go so far. And we can layer up, we can add more later. So get the outline, get the bits you're certain about on the scene, add some loose randomness in there as well, and then just bring everything to life. Now, if you do want to use more than one colour, this is a great time to start adding another colour or two in. Here I've got a chili red, which is a nice vibrant red, which will hopefully mix and make some interesting purples. And a few lines of that, tiny touches, is all I'm going to need to bring an extra bit of dimension. And we'll see, as the colour comes in, how everything just suddenly pops to life. Now I'm focusing that water. Remember, we talked about how we need to have a bit of thought about where our water goes. Otherwise the colours will just spread out and the lines will blur. But if we focus our water on the areas we want a bit of tone, if we think about where we want those colours to flow, then we can just put our water in those places and the colours just see what happens. There's nothing much cleverer than that going on. You're thinking about where's the darkest areas, where's the sort of boldest tones, the darkest values that we want. That's where you activate your colour with your water. And by thinking of those wet part 2 techniques, you can see on the right there, I just activated a bit more and I've generated some really interesting watery textures. The direction, the amount of movement of the brush will just help the paint the paint from the pencil move in different ways. It will allow it to mix together more, perhaps. We've got some murky purples going on where the blues and reds have mixed quite a lot, and we've got some bright reds where I've just got the red on its own. We can even be very specific. I want some of these windows to feel darker, so using my size 24 ludicrously large brush and a gentle touch of water, notice how the tone in those windows, the value just suddenly jumps up a notch. We don't have to be clever using hundreds of different brushes, hundreds of different pencils to create something that's actually pretty fascinating. As we move on, we might want to reaffirm some of those lines. Those lines will get softer when you have added water to them. Now I'm being cheeky again, and this is my third and I promise my final colour. It's a bit of burnt umber, and I'm just using it to add even more value and something else bit more perhaps neutral or shadowy feeling. And I'm not going to go mad with this. I'm just applying some dry textures and some sort of wet on wet or wet part 2 textures. And notice how that entire application of pencil took 20 to 25 seconds. And then another layer, little bit of water, subtle tones, subtle things here. We've got very little on this page apart from that lovely blue, and the rest of the other colours are just adding something extra, another little dimension. Don't forget those splatters. Obviously they're not vital, and obviously some people won't enjoy them, but I love them so much. They definitely, for me, they make this feel more complicated than it was. They make it feel more clever to me than it was. And I think, about now, I'm happy to call this a job well done. My simple sketch coming to life has plenty of structure, has plenty of tone, has plenty going on. Now, if you enjoyed this, let me know. I love thinking of different ways to use simple media and I'd love to show you more ideas. I've got another video like this on using crayons, so perhaps I'll see you in that one. It's linked down below. Or perhaps you'll join me in one of my other watercolour pencil videos, which I've also linked down below, if you want to get into more in-depth layering techniques, for example.